you, right? You can't see anything. Thanks for that introduction, Rod. I'm going to start with a poem, not quite my most recent poem, but most of you know, or some of you know, that Brian and I were away for 5 weeks. So this is the first impression on coming back. After 5, pardon me, and it's a Scoutonic verse. After 5 weeks away, where we lived is renewed, suddenly made bright, huge, from square foot to tube for the toothpaste. The fridge is a waste, land of empty. We paced the elevator floor. There's room for 8 more at a dinner party in here. Chore it is to walk to hear the hub, 4 hotel rooms away. Love, what did you say? Why canned music phrase from every store and cafe? This city has 4 wheels good, not 2. Who feels scooters and one-man dealies for tow trucks or roles best played by monsters? Holes in traffic under controls of lights, of signs, of lines and roads, back to the fine land of apology, dine like Caesar on excesses of sorry, 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 lest a spine incline towards S of someone else's. And cold. Who is so dastardly bold as to turn off the heat? Old bones creak in 2 layers deep of wool. But still, a fog creeps valleys, rivers. I could weep at the beauty of sunrise, catching the smokestack. Eyes startled, but home is realized and clearly in sight. Clutter. The unneededness of utter, useless paper. Clean putter remake the nest. Refresh the mind to habits, precious kept, like friends. Flesh is the real home. That and those who love us. We can dispose of what's addictive, the heat that froze, the cold of things. We miss not a carpet, not a light. List what matters? Us. Joy exists. I can find anything. So authorship. So thinking of in terms of authorship, what came to mind are what some poets feel that they're stealing from people if they are quoting, or if they're riffing off someone's poem, or if they're borrowing a phrase that they liked when they didn't like anything else in the whole work, that they're therefore are somehow hurting the other writer. And I thought of the issue of who is author, and I thought of 3 examples of this. Someone named Damien Seals, I don't know who knows him, but there was a new version of Moby Dick put out by the publisher. And he looked at it, and it's a simplified version about half the length. And he liked the original Moby Dick pretty well, all right. So he went through and he did sort of equivalent of Plunderverse for a novel. He took the simplified version, he took the original, and he did erasure of everything the simplified version had, and he published exclusively the words left over that the publisher didn't think was good enough. And he called his The Whale. So is that infringing on Herman Melville's proprietary rights? Or is that completely new work, but all the words are in the original order? So that's one case. Another case is when we were in Dublin at Trinity College at the I can't read that. Oh yes, the Book of Douro. At the Book of Douro room had this poem by a 9th century monk. And it was a nice poem. It was a man sitting by candlelight, composing, searching his dictionary for words as his cat searches for mice. I thought, that's a nice poem. I should write it down or take a photo, but no photos were allowed. And it was a rather long poem, so I didn't really want to stand in the room with it, write it all down. But a couple weeks later in a poetry library in London, I saw effectively the same poem, with no credit given and but it was structurally in thought. In the opening line, the twist couplet at the end, it was in modern English, but it was effectively unaltered the same poem. Is that intellectual copyright infringement of somebody 1,100 years ago, or is that bringing to a new audience, but he didn't give credit, so I got confused. I didn't buy the book, unfortunately. I'd rather have liked to add that. The third case I can think of is Greg Betts and Gary Barwin are taking Christian Bach's Eunoia, and they're substituting all the A poems and putting in U's instead and messing around with it like that, and doing a performance of Eunoia in Pig Latin. So is that a whole new work? It probably is sufficiently moved. So as we're what is the author's role in poetry? Is a poetry supposed to curate what he thinks is important about the world, or she thinks is important about the world? Is the person to be a watchdog who is supposed to point out what needs to change or reinforce what needs to stay the same? Is the poet only answerable to himself or herself to counterbalance outside forces, inside forces, try and create a balance and forget about the rest of the world? Or the fourth possible is the poet a community member, and the whole point is to connect to others, to communicate, and in that frame bring forward whatever is a useful thought. On the case of it being an author or only answering to himself or herself, Michel Tremblay said, "A writer is writing a letter to self that never ends." And it's this sort of wandering search. You don't know why you're writing, but you must do it. On the subject of being a watchdog, Buckminster Fuller said, "You never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete." As far as a communicator or community member, C.C. Coulton in the 1800s said, "The writer does the most who gives his readers the most knowledge and takes from him the least time." So, brevity. The thing of communicating and authorship is that you're communicating to a particular audience, or you're communicating to a general audience, but it's sort of like standard English versus speaking a dialect. So if you're speaking in a small group, poets writing for poets, that continually jargon's often more specialty, or you're writing a general poem about your life for any audience, you don't need to use as much poetic devices because they may not be appreciated by a general audience anyway. So thinking in terms of, so when you're as a community member, it depends on what you say as an author, depends on what your audience expects. And it may vary on compression, your style, your subject, the attitude that is allowed or promoted. And then you try to negotiate to overlap that with what you think is interesting. What does that say? Oh, yes. So speaking of to a particular audience, most of you know I write in various types. So this is an anthology which Claudia edited into our words.
I edited it.
Oh, sorry.
Accidental.
Yes, that would be right. I knew it was that wrong. Sorry, Grant. In the squeaking cold, breath and walk, both shorter. Now I'll read twice. In the squeaking cold, breath and walk, both shorter. That's unfortunately coming up soon. And from another, I don't know, some of you live south of the city. There's a Valley Writers Guild, which, despite rumors to the contrary, is not dead again. And they've recently put out their anthology. And this would be more a poem to general audience. It was picked for publication in 2006, and I think I wrote it somewhere around 2003 or 2004, and it's finally hit print this year. So it's called Making Connections, dedicated to Hua, which is sort of tying into what Sean was reading about Eastern lunar. During the Lunar Spring Festival in February, spring was swallowed in peach blossoms. Here was deep in snow, sparkling drifts of landed diamonds. Your mother called from Vietnam. Her photo showed the rest of your family, closer than fence pickets, a row of proud faces under a canopy of blossoms. Now in central Canada, it's mid-May, and finally the crabapple trees splay pink open. It's cool and late for spring, but your eyes have a knack for finding in any season's yard stars. Filling up on spring, you come in after a walk, bringing a branch of your peach blossoms. Your hands are calm, one cupped as it would be behind a toddler learning to walk. You want to catch any tender petal, halt its fall, hold it all. You have broken off a branch of your peach blossoms, and seeing your face glow, I swallow corrections, swallow reprieve, swallow images of which neighbor's fence you must have leaned over to reach a Vietnamese spring in May in Canada. And under the idea of the purpose of an author, or the role of an author, is to curate and spread ideas. Part of the role is to be conscious of what you're resisting and what you're promoting, and perhaps if you're promoting one, then to write to the opposite. If you're resisting one, then put the shoe on the other foot and write the other way. But one thing that, as I'm reading poetry, that I tend to get irritated from is poem after poem of women as passive, as quiet, as sitting in chairs, as being sad, as observing a family, as this sort of thing. So part of that sort of informed my poem, which is in Pent Up, which is, as Rod mentioned, for Angel House Press, which came out this spring. Cycling past flash dance of trees' knees, spokes spun, thin shades, barcode pavement path downhill. What bell jar of wonder, asphyxiation, mental moppet side sprints of gotta, opulent urgencies, unseated, plan trunked, whippet fendered, the bicycle upended. And her? Let's not mention the bruised extent, pride, schoolgirl kneecaps, the melted clocks of them rolling along the path, slurp stilled, and the intestines slunk down into their gaps, gasp a ruin of her own. It cues the resent from present, and snippety flipped sky, a supplest of supplanting the next thing. At this wipeout, a crackling underfoot is overhead, stranger with inquiries. You all right, miss? Poise bit. Fine. A humbug is in roadside silt, half sunk, beetled back smooth. This what was spat. Look up. Healing is the scarum serum. Rise, swing a leg. The feet fit, so shoe us. Another sheet or something. There it is. So as part of curating, you may want to question the ideology that or push an ideology, or a language, either language to be broken apart, complicated on purpose, or to recover the language which generally is seen derisively, such as local English. So in Cultural Shifts, I put up this poem last year, Got It All Away Again. We drug the bushel out of the cellar. When we done up the beets last week, what a job. I washed the counter all, what a mess. The ones we grew pickled up fine. Only a few ones up, too dry or something got at them. We had to get some more. The bottom beets, they were hard as anything. Bad year for sugar beets. See my nails, still stained all. Your aunt the same. So thinking of authorship, thinking of what is it that we're trying to do and trying not to do. Tan Lin is someone who writes online a lot. And his point of view is to stop making sense. Because we're sort of surrounded by sense. We have shoved down our throats these hero story arc everywhere we go. A 3-minute commercial has to have a plot. Everything has to have if you go to have a conversation, you might have to get your point in quickly and move on because we're on this sort of time-bite society. So his concept of playing with language is to erase content so we can relax. And to sample what we already know, and then let that evoke and open up worlds on the reader's time instead of on the writer's time. And he says that he avoids poet's voice by writing his poems and then inputting them into a computer and having the computer voice read them and chopping them up so that he speaks on a general topic, but then each sentence or paragraph is chopped up and randomized. So the themes keep coming back, and he's still talking the same thing, and you get these surprising junctions. But then it's also, he's taking the author a step out of what is being said so you can hear the ideas without the emotionalism of voice, without the study of how one speaks or how one presents. So one thing I was doing in that sort of taking the author out of the writing was the above ground one that I did last year, which was corpus poems, where I have a scrap file where I put in notes that I'll use at some point for something, and sometimes they don't get used. So I went and basically did a sort of a variation of what I do when I can't think of a new play order for iTunes. I just put in like 3-letter combinations likely to be in some words, and then get a playlist that's randomized in a way. So instead I took 2 letters, 3 letters, maybe with spaces, maybe without, and then pulled out of that document that single word and line them together as it falls, or that word in a phrase if the phrase is interesting, and then scramble them and see what comes out. Such as this, comfortable unelaborations, abstracts, changeable labels, alabaster vocabularies, reasonable, recognizable, but abumps. The syllable being is about being presentable, abuelitas, abstemious, tabling parabolas of established jabber, rabid, habitual absentee, taboos, fabulous, flabby abs are babied, probably above collaboration, grabby these absolutes. So sometimes meaning come up in phrases and sometimes they don't, but they sort of shake up your thinking habit, and hopefully they shake up the thinking habit of the reader to sort of move away from the idea of that everything must be an epic story. So under the idea that we're communicators in a community. We're in a community of a certain time, but just like every person is every age they've ever been, you know, you're with somebody and it's like suddenly you can see the 4-year-old in them, or suddenly you can see the 14-year-old just pop out for a few strides. It's like in literature we're like that too. There are people still romantic poets. There are people who are following one stream of haiku poets. We have people who are following all these different things that aren't exactly marked time, but they aren't exactly, they progress on their own little trajectories. And each person that joins the trajectory comes knowing this stuff or not knowing any stuff, and it stands alone You either have the hooks to add all this other resonance, or you don't. But maybe what you've read is all 1800s, 1700s, 1600s sort of symbolic religious poems of allegory, in which case you'll write that because that's what you're thinking. But then if you present it to a general audience, how do you get person Q to the same page? So you have this sort of symbolic poems that then there was response to it in the general writing community. Missing page. Oh, there it is. That worldwide there was sort of a flow. There are flows that happens. If you're a farmer, suddenly everybody in the world grows corn this year. Everybody in the world goes on pesticides. Everybody in the world goes off pesticides. But there are these patterns. Around the world, all the architects suddenly get taken by Rococo, or towards emulating Greece, or towards shifting to boxes with metal features. And the same thing happens in literature, whether you're in France or whether you're in United States or South America. There's a feature figure that rises, and then people tend to follow it. But only the people who are looking for the next trend. All the time there are people who are doing folk architecture around the world. It doesn't stop because some new architect says, no, we're all boat shaped for this decade. So all the time there are people who are writing personal poems, who are writing verses that have no aspiration to write something which is going to be the next literary trend. Or literary trend, I don't mean in terms of this year, but this century or these 3 centuries. So we had the epic poems that then Walt Whitman twisted and made into sort of grandiose, but about self and country. And then people responded to that with another counterbalance of wanting to write more that were more about, sorry, can't read my handwriting. Things that were aggregating and about the now instead of something that's a long length of time. And where did his name go? Stephen Burt has something that he's labeled the new thing. I think that was the Boston Review this spring. And it's the idea of going back to the classics, but also to go to the concrete, to move away from the breaking of syntax, and sort of going neo-traditional, but more curating documents, more curating pieces of language, rather than to mix mix facts in and flatten the language, such as Juliana Spar does. I think I left one. Oh, there it is. So this, I'll just close with 2 poems, which are, 3 poems, found it. This is from the Over My Dead Corpus, which is a poem also of the corpus sort of idea, which was Angel House Press is bringing out this fall. So it's taking this sampling that is being done by rap and being done by who some call avant-garde poets are doing. Anyway, I'll just read. Corpus 38. You said something about a forest. Make a paste of 50-50 cream of tartar and vinegar. This will create over 32 kilometers of new coastline, met longitudinally or flippantly, paying for its time and amusement. This method is also helpful for removing sauce stains. Meteors or comets for gourmet meteorology run along Metcalfe Street, putting the symmetry in mystery. Something overflows. The mice man cometh with Socratic method lawyers, a random lobbing, sometimes grenade, sometimes bouquet. Please don't take it literally, it's only a metaphor from the tree line about 70 meters away. And one which is called One, which starts with a quote by Pirie from his book Liquid Paper, New and Selected Poems. Look, they said, it's up to you. How many years do you want to live? And Uncle Jim held up one finger, the middle one. Brutal honesty stole one middling zone. Radical honesty is the opponent. Component hormones, let alone geological time. It's 10 stones back. Honey prone, breakage prone, ain't got no bone, one queen, one double futon, and any one times 32 outnumbered by 87 exact generic someones. The needs of many at 66, outweighed by the 367 individuals. Colonel, this planet is gone, money. 1 year subscriptions, Lionel Co-op's one. Sanctioned Indonesian Tyrone is questioned, good intention failure counts as done. Toners are carcinogenic as done. Dirty, flirty, 40-fold, each one on a cell phone. The auction money, a monetized touchstone, a go-go dog. One fine pillow, and the executioner never comes. So conditioned as he is to the falconer, who, as mentioned, will have none. And last one is bird against glass. Against my palm, you are small. Your heart beats faster than mine. I stretch, I indulge, I forgive your fear, imply myself fear maker, when perhaps we are both fine, both a trifle stunned. So I've brought to light some other thoughts on.
Pearl,
Yeah, questions?
in Stephen Brockwell in The Real Made Up, included a number of computer-generated poems, which put the author in a purely curatorial role. Is that a valid approach?
There's no such thing as an invalid approach.
Explain. How can it be that meaning that's unintended by the author becomes a significance, an item of significance?
Let's say you're writing an email to someone, and you're writing an email to someone who, referring to that person's spouse, and you say, I really like your wife, and you put a smiley face by intention, but what you actually do is to make a winky face. Have you just created meaning? Or not?
So
the accidental.
the idea of the author as a curator,
Right.
as opposed to a creator,
Right.
But
the authorship is always half in the mind of the reader. So the author is just presenting, and the reader may pick up on something or may not, whether it was something that the author intended to create or didn't intend to create.
So the poetry is what happens in the reader's head.
Part of it. I mean, if there is no author, someone may see poetry, especially if they're taking LSD, when they look at an egg.
Thanks. Anyone else?
I just wanted to mention, if you haven't read the other voice book to Octavio Paz, it's worth a read. It's got some ideas on this subject. Other questions, comments, thoughts?
Okay. Thanks.